Welcome to the PDX files. Each week we dive into the world of the weird and the unexplained, here in the Pacific Northwest and beyond. My name is Peej.
And I'm Mac.
Mac, what are we talking about this week?
Well, today we're going to kind of get into a bit of a UAP, UFO terminology 101, and more specifically for the title 1.0. Some of the basic things that you ought to know about this topic. It is, as we've already gone into, a local topic, but it is a national and international topic as well. And so some of the stuff we're going to get into is kind of get you used to understanding some of the very basics of this topic. And later on, as we get into other episodes, we'll get a bit more in depth into 2.0 and maybe 3.0. It's a very deep subject, and one that we want to treat with respect.
All right, we've got quite a few videos that we're going to walk through in this particular episode. And we're ready?
I'm ready. Let's do this thing, man.
Okay, here's the first one.
You've heard of UFOs, but do you know what a UAP is? Both terms are in the news as government officials look into reports of mysterious things spotted in the sky.
It's rotating.
But what's the difference between a UFO and a UAP? Here's what we know. UFO stands for Unidentified Flying Object. The U.S. Air Force coined the term in 1952, just 5 years after a rancher in Roswell, New Mexico, found strange debris on his land. By their definition, a UFO is something seen in the sky that military or other experts can't find an explanation for. While UFOs could technically be anything from a balloon to a spy plane, for most people the term has become closely associated with flying saucers and aliens.
Both radar beams are bouncing off our ship.
On the other hand, UAP stands for Unidentified Aerial Phenomena. Just like UFO, it is used to describe unexplainable sights reported in the sky.
Oh my gosh, dude.
But scientists now think some of those things may not be objects at all. They could be caused by weather or Earth's magnetic field, much like the Northern Lights. And since the term UFO makes people think of little green men, government agencies began using the term UAP instead in 2021. While there is plenty of speculation about what may be causing them, UFOs and UAPs have become a real focus for members of Congress. They say no matter what you call them, having things you can't identify in the skies above the U.S. is a threat to national security.
I think she's pretty accurate in that description. The only thing I would say is like nobody has ever, I mean, maybe they have in the past, but no one's going to be confusing the Northern Lights with the UFO. Let's just be honest with that. That's kind of BS right there. Some of the kind of the bias that comes from the media about some of the stuff, but the rest of it's true. The UFO phenomenon it sort of depends on where you look at it, right? So you can look it back into ancient times, and we'll get into that in future episodes. You can look at it into more modern times as well in World War II. But the classic description of a UFO or a saucer, which a lot of people associate with the UFO, this is kind of where we're going back into the olden days, was back in 1947. So we were talking about the Trent UFO, but also Ken Arnold, who was a pilot for military, I believe, this civilian pilot who actually coined the term UFO. And so you look at that, it goes back way back in the old days, and now they're calling it a UAP. It's an interesting story as to how it kind of get to this point, but essentially a UAP, an unidentified anomalous phenomena, is the same thing as a UFO. And as we're going to get into in this video, we're going to see how it has kind of morphed into other ways of looking at it as well. But I think I agree with her above and beyond that one kind of reference that she made. I think we're in pretty good shape here as far as this goes.
Way of Will John.
UAP and UFO are kind of two sides of the same coin. Unidentified flying objects, UFO, unidentified aerial phenomenon, UAP. And what happens here is, you've got three groups of people interested in UFOs or UAPs. You've got the common person who just wants to know if life is out there because they watched a lot of X-Files and they can't get enough Discovery Channel, 10 o'clock lineup about the next UFO story. And that's cool. Why are there cows their blood is being drained, and why are there crop circles in Indiana? That's cool. That's a big chunk of one audience. And then on the other extreme, you have the government audience, which is like, we want to control the skies above our country. What is going on in the skies above our country? Are these alien? Are these a foreign national threat? Are these experimental aircrafts from civilians or corporations? We want to be able to control the security above our skies. And then in the middle, you have this squishy space that I serve. And that's all the people who want to know because they have big money at stake. Right. So, for example, one of the clients that I had in this larger UFO research study, they were looking at investing in a mine, and they wanted to know, was this mine a safe investment in the long term? They knew how many years it would take for the mine to become profitable. They knew how much equipment would they have to invest for the mine. They knew where the mine was and what kind of politics happened there. But then they also knew that mine had a great deal of UFO activity, 50 some years of reported sightings of, farmers and merchants and whoever else saying that they saw something strange above the sky. Well, the last thing that an investor wants to do is invest in a huge capital project that then never actually generates profit because people are too afraid, or because UFOs are there, or whatever else. Some alien phenomenon happens 5 years from now, and the $13 billion they sank in the mine is never going to be recuperated, right? That's how they think. So it's really easy for them to pull someone like me in and say, hey, we'll pay you $50,000 to do a research study and explain to us what is the real risk proposition from UFOs.
Exactly.
So that's the world that exists between the government worrying about what's in the sky and the UFO enthusiast wondering whether or not Alien Diaries is real.
I mean, that to me, all three of those points make a lot of sense. You look at the personal stories, you look at the commercial stories, and then the bias stories of everything that goes into a place like that. And this guy who was just on a minute ago was a former CIA agent, so he kind of knows what the business is, right? So looking at it from that perspective, just understanding that they're thinking about it in that way is pretty impressive, because I wouldn't go to like some place in the middle of like Central Oregon. It's like, oh, how many UFOs are around this area that I'm about to make an investment in? I think that's a pretty interesting way to look at it. But also the fact that, again, an ex-CIA person is describing it in business terms.
Right.
This is kind of interesting.
I'll just have a quick question. I know because you mentioned it at the top. UAP stands for unidentified anomalous phenomena.
Yeah.
Although in the couple of videos so far, it's unidentified aerial phenomena.
They haven't quite figured that out yet. The most latest term is anomalous, but aerial, because, and again, we're going to get into this a little bit later. Aerial is one part of it, right? But there's also air, land, and sea, which we're definitely going to get into a little bit later on in the video, I promise.
If I say to you alien aircrafts, most of us think UFOs, right?
Boom.
And we think of space. But there's another area of phenomenon you may not have considered, and researchers have been diving in to study them. We're talking about USOs, unidentified submerged objects. There have been so many reports of underwater phenomenon that have recently sparked the federal government to change the name of UFOs to UAPs, unidentified anomalous phenomena, to include land, air, and sea. However, 80% of the world's ocean remains unexplored, making USOs harder to scientifically prove.
I was going to say.
Joining me now is Richard Dolan, a UAP historian and host of Richard Dolan Intelligent Disclosure on YouTube. Richard, good morning.
Hi, Nick. Thank you very much for having me here. It's a pleasure.
No, help us break this down. You've researched more than 600 cases of unidentified submerged objects. What are some of the challenges you face with researching water-based phenomena and then getting that information to the public writ large?
Great question. Probably the biggest challenge is simply getting access to a lot of these reports. Most people are landlubbers. We live on the land. We're not out in the middle of the water. Unless you live on the shore of an ocean or of a large lake, you're going to be unlikely to see such water-based phenomenon. And so, of all of the UFO or UAP reports that we have, only a small number are actually truly USO type reports.
Yeah, so just that by itself is really interesting because they're not just saying like it's the ocean. He almost kind of like intimates that it could be like the Great Lakes and other areas where there's like deep bodies of water. I think a little bit in what he's talking about, and that kind of really reflects a lot of the kind of things that we've been getting more and more information from the government. Certainly the if you want to look up the TikTok, which we're going to get to that episode eventually, we're talking about some of the more national outlook on some of the stuff. But if you look at that there was like a USO, which is an unidentified submerged object, which is becoming like, I never thought I would just say that in my lifetime, but there is like those things that are going on. There's actual evidence for. There's film footage.
I'm not
Right,
as familiar. I'm not as familiar with that. Is that in the Atlantic, the Pacific, or where were they?
Both. I mean, if you look at there was an incident in around Southern California was one of them. That's kind of where the Tic Tac came from. And then there's another one, Andrew Graves. Look up Andrew Graves. He's another UAP proponent, but he's like a former pilot, like a high level pilot who worked on the Atlantic side of things. It's happening everywhere. And it's not just happening in the U.S. It's happening everywhere. So the idea that that is just an air phenomenon is kind of gone out the window. It never happened before in the previous 60 years. Like we have no idea where these things are coming from. And they got this little video going on here at the same time that we're playing it, but it still shows like the lack of understanding of there are actual military pilots seeing these things on a daily basis. There are commercial pilots seeing these things on a daily basis. There are people who are on the seas, the sea captains, which is kind of crazy to even think that anymore. But that's actually going on, seeing these things on a daily basis. This is a well documented phenomenon that I'm glad to see is beginning to get into the mainstream media, even though News Nation may not be like the number one. But I feel like a lot of these things are actually coming to pass, and people are starting to recognize it. So it's good. It's positive for me.
Yeah, what I don't understand about the USO, is that, I mean, could they just be whales? Could they just be like standard?
No. What they're actually observing are like fast moving objects that should not be able to move fast under the water. So when I talk about the TikTok, and some of the footage that's actually associated with that is that it's going under the water and moving at an extremely fast speed against resistance, which shouldn't happen.
Wow.
And this has been observed all across the earth, frankly, and also it is when it comes out of the ocean, it has the ability to shut down systems. There's plenty of stories that we've got in the hopper about this, but that it will actually stop the ability of a U.S. aircraft carrier to do any kind of business.
Okay.
With that. And so, and it's been observed by not just like radar, you have a radar, or you have visual, you have radar, you have infrared, and all sorts of different things that you can do to track items like this in the sky, and really underwater, and wherever you're going to have any kind of like military installation. It's been going on for the last 100 years almost. So it's something that a lot of people don't know about, but ought to know about, and hopefully we can bring a little bit of that education to people.
All right, we'll continue here.
Let's do it.
I scour them where I can. So at this point, I've collected a little more than 600 very good, I would say,
I don't know what
extremely good cases that I have a feeling people will be interested in learning more about.
Tell me about one or two of the most fascinating ones that you've
dog
researched.
going across the whole thing.
Yeah. Well, about 20% of all of the cases I found have to do with one of the nation's military, one of the world's militaries.
That's a Trump,
most
that's a Trump
of those
photo.
are United States military. By far, most of the ones that I've collected. And I can say, when we hear the folks at the Pentagon say things like, well, we're going to look into this problem. We'll get back to you when we find out more about it. When I look at some of these Navy cases, there is no chance whatsoever that the higher upper echelon at the Pentagon and the Navy do not know. One example, there was a case from 1971. It goes back a bit. We've got many more recent cases, but this one from 1971 involved the USS John F. Kennedy aircraft carrier in July of that year. We have a very detailed account from a gentleman who was aboard that ship, ran communications, and described just after they had finished a very intensive period of training called carrier qualifications, or CARQUALs. They were in the Caribbean, and they saw this massive orange glowing spherical object that hovered above the ship, and according to what he said, shut down their communications for a good 20-25 minutes while the ship went to general quarters, battle stations. I would say if you're the United States Navy, there's probably nothing more important to you than your aircraft carriers, which have nuclear weapons. And anything that shuts it down even for 20 minutes has got to be of the highest level. That is not the only such case. There are many of them. A few of them from the old Soviet Navy as well, but quite a few from the United States Navy.
Yeah, so I mean, this shows that again, it's underwater, it's overseas, it's in the areas where the strongest elements of our military are, right? So you can't really, I mean, I guess you can deny it, but I mean, there's so many reports, and there's so many people have seen it, either firsthand or have heard about it secondhand, that I don't understand why the government would continue to deny some of these sightings, but they're going to continue to do it. But so it's kind of up to the the people to kind of keep bringing it to their attention. I mean, 1971. This isn't like the time when there are like a bunch of weirdos out there, a bunch of Trumpers out there seeing some sort of conspiratorial theories. I mean, even in the stuff that you go back to 2004 and 2011, even beyond that, these are being seen on a regular basis by our men and women in uniform. It's kind of scary, but it's also kind of amazing when you think about it too. And you don't hear the government anymore coming out against these folks, not publicly anyway. They do a lot of damage to some whistleblowers behind the scenes, but the people who are coming out with this is like, yeah, I don't know. You can't really do much about it.
Exactly. I mean, the governments would like to continue to kind of control the narrative around it, right? Because, obviously it's been depicted in TV shows and movies as to why governments are hesitant to either admit or, like outright deny the existence of these things because they don't want to cause any kind of hysteria or sort of, mass hysteria and people to get nervous or do anything crazy on their own, right? But with today's technology and even, as we continue to develop better technologies of discernment, whether they be radar or any kind of equipment for listening or viewing underwater or even in the skies, and with everybody having a freaking smartphone these days, I mean, there's only so much that the government can do to keep things under wraps.
It happens a lot, and that's the thing. It's like people say, "Well, why are we seeing these things?" People are seeing these things. You just have to look for it. It's not that difficult to find. And I know people say, well, you find it on YouTube or you find it on this or that. Yes, but that's because that's the only way for people to put this information out.
But what?
And sorry,
Yeah,
go ahead.
but it's also a little bit, uh, again with the today's technology, it's also a lot pretty easy to fake it. So you kind
Yeah,
of like you got to really do your research, or you got to really, I don't know, almost like take things with a grain of salt. But then, I think we'd mentioned it before in a previous episode, when patterns begin to show, and when more than one person sees it, more than 100 people see it, when you see a pattern, there's no, the deniability of it kind of lessens, right?
yep,
And
I
the
agree.
ability of the government or whoever to kind of um, conceal the truth decreases as well, right?
Yeah, I think that's what you have to do is you have to look at it for yourself, right, and make your own kind of determination about it. It's like we're not here to like influence anybody. We have our own opinions about kind of what these things look like and kind of what they mean for us. But 100% is like our show, and the folks that we follow and the folks that we look at are not going to be like trying to convince you to like follow their theory. It's like you need to figure it out for yourself. Let's present the evidence. Let's present some of the stories. Let's get down into it a little bit, and then it's up to you to look for yourself and figure out if there's any trends or any things that kind of back that up, what you're thinking or what you're not thinking. I mean, that's really what the point of it is. So,
Have you ever seen anything I mean, like so far in your life, have you ever seen anything that up in the skies,
nah, I
or you've not
wish.
had a personal,
I wish. I keep wishing for that on a daily basis that I would be able to. Honestly, I mean, I do.
you
That's the thing.
keep driving in abandoned dirt roads?
But that's the whole thing is I have talked to people who have like honestly, I have talked to people who have said that they've seen things. I'm like, okay, well then it seems like that sounds like a plane, or it sounds like you were like in a dream state, or that's where my mind goes is to like the most easiest explanation. But the problem is that is not just the people talking to me; it's the people who have reported it on a millions, billions basis at this point of like pointing out that something is going on. And so you like if it was just a few million people over like hundreds of years, okay, yeah, it's bullshit, right? But we're talking about a significantly different number and the same types of sightings and the same types of things that were happening before social media, before the ability to look it up. Like if you're in Florida, or say you want to say Spain controlled Florida at the time, and shit was happening in Europe, you would have no way of corroborating those things together, right? So there's all sorts of different stories throughout time, as far as we know, as far as recorded history, that these things are in our in our writings, they're in our art, they're in our nomenclature, they're in our stories that we tell one another. So to me, that is a trend. Whether it's a long-term trend, I don't know. But I mean, I feel like there's a lot more saying that there's something else going on than there's not. And I think looking at it from a strictly like a skeptical perspective is a very narrow-minded way of looking at things.
What did you? Sorry, I had a helicopter flying by, so I wanted to make sure that I needed to mute
They're
it, and
looking
then.
for you right now. Yes, they're looking for you.
But here in Oregon, actually, there's actually a Wikipedia page that we're gonna put in the show notes. There's
Yeah,
actually like I said, a Wikipedia page of UFO sightings just here in Oregon.
lots of UFO sightings in Oregon. It's really impressive, actually.
Yeah,
We're
and
actually one of the more hotspots.
we certainly covered one in an earlier episode. Of course, the Trent UFO in McMinnville, Oregon. But yeah, I mean, I personally have not had any UFO sightings myself. I think one time I thought I saw something, but it ended up being the International Space Station. Because I
That's
was
also
in
cool too. I mean, people
it
should
was
look up into the
it
sky,
was
right?
cool too, and certainly I think the first time I saw it. First of all, this was in Central Oregon or Eastern Oregon,
Bend.
and the sky there was very little light pollution, so the sky was so clear that I could see even without my glasses, I could see the stars really clearly, and I did have to put my glasses on in order to see the International Space Station fly across the sky, and it was definitely a sight to behold. But
No, it's awesome. I remember seeing satellites when I was a kid. I mean, it's like if you have any kind of like minimal education as to what's going on in the sky, you will know what's going on there. And that's the thing that leads me to believe that people who see anomalous or unidentified things are more likely to be believed, especially if they're in that field, I guess you can say.
sure. So this next video actually goes into different types of aliens.
Yes. We'll play it here real quick. Scientifically speaking, no one truly knows what aliens are going to look like. And any version of life that develops on other planets could well be drastically different from our own. With just a sample of one to build from, life on Earth, it's difficult to calculate or even predict what the rest of space could have in store, besides presumably infinite variety. However, there are those on Earth who claim to have already seen aliens, sometimes via an alien abduction. Survivors of these encounters have differing stories, but the most common themes include scientific experiments, invasive probing, and the taking of samples, sometimes via quite intimate means. While the overall narratives often overlap, however, what an alien physically looks like can vary. There apparently are different types to contend with, and with some surprises. For example, although the image of little green men has long been popular in society and science fiction, genuinely reported abduction cases rarely include such a creature. Other alien kinds are much more common in sightings. The Greys are by far the most popular depiction among those claiming to have met with aliens in real life. They're described as having a generally humanoid composition and sharing certain characteristics with us, although they're often shorter, have larger heads, bigger, darker eyes, and a distinctly gray skin tone. This particular alien won't be unfamiliar to you. The Greys are still today's sci-fi favorites, and something of a worldwide phenomenon. Going from most abduction accounts, they don't usually speak as such, but instead communicate telepathically from their minds to yours. The Greys aren't usually overly hostile, but they're not averse to causing an abductee pain either, so long as they get the information they want. Similarly, the Greys are said to be extremely intelligent but lacking emotion. So even if they're not ill-meaning, they are ruthless. As such, abductees claim that the Greys will probe and take samples, seemingly in order to create hybrids. And their rise to become perhaps the archetype for what an alien should look like, at least during the 20th century, can be traced back to one of the most infamous abduction stories in history, that of Betty and Barney Hill in 1961. While it was the Greys, too, who were supposedly at the center of the Roswell crash in 1947. According to a map remembered by Betty Hill, a map she claims to have seen as a projection inside an unknown alien ship. Her Greys, at least, came from the far-off binary star system of Zeta Reticuli. If true, they've traveled many, many light years to become humankind's Alien 101.
So, I mean, that is like one of the most earliest versions of an alien abduction, and a description of the Greys, which is like one of the leading species that people see, I guess you can say, and you know, and in general, like what that dude was saying was pretty true. Is like they kind of have this, like, I would say, more neutral view on kind of how they look at us, and you know, trying to help us a little bit, but you know, kind of also sort of studying and sort of seeing what they can do. But I mean, it's not that much different from like a human going down to a volcanic vent in the ocean and trying to figure out what like life looks like down there, right? It's like,
Right.
that's kind of how they look at us. It's like we're a bunch of like pond scum, basically, trying to sort of figure out things. You know, there's a lot of a lot more lore around what we're going to see in a couple more seconds here. But the, you know, I'd say that the Greys are the classic ones. They've been put into our popular culture the most. Also been a very big part of alien abductions stories, which we'll talk about in just a second.
Yeah, it's definitely. I think as mentioned several videos so far, the reference "little green men"
Yeah.
kind of is interesting because much of the depictions of the alien abductions, like the video says, have always been gray. Because and even
Right.
even in that movie, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, those aliens were gray.
Right.
It's
And
not
they have
little
the
green
big
men.
the big eyes, a little
Exactly.
the nose and all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
And actually, as a quick aside, there's a TV show out there right now called Resident Alien, which is actually a pretty funny show. And and it's about I mean the title is kind of misleading, but it is an alien that crash landed in Earth, and then was starting to live with humans. But that alien actually had there was an episode where the alien was actually describing, oh, there's these different types of aliens, different types of creatures that visited your planet, the Greys being one of them, etc. So it's kind of interesting that there's definitely a correlation there.
Yeah, I mean, it's similar to even like the Men in Black. I mean, they were talking about
Oh
that back
yeah,
even in
true.
those days. I think we were like somehow a hub of like all these aliens coming through and staying here and hanging out, and kind of had all these rules. Like that would not surprise me at all if that were
Oh
true,
no.
because it is so bureaucratic. It's so bureaucratic, and the way to handle things from a human kind of perspective. So I can totally see that happening. But again, there's a lots of different species that we don't really know about, and
Mm-hmm.
some of these, as we've gone through this, we're kind of learning about.
All right, we'll continue here.
Another version of ETs, though, is much more animalistic to our eyes. Rather than smooth all over like the Greys, they can be scaly, armored, and less humanoid. They're variously known as the Archons, Saurians, or Draconians. And while descriptions differ in science fiction and in claimed real-world encounters, these beings are generally said to be a few feet taller than us. Again, the stories of them do differ, but they're usually said to be ancient and far longer lived than we are. It's said that they walked the surface of Earth thousands, perhaps millions of years before humanity did, but were in fact forced underground by the arrival of another type of alien in our planet's distant past called the Anunnaki.
Now, the Anunnaki is something that we'll definitely have a separate episode about. That is something that's actually attached to the Sumerian texts and to ancient alien believers as well. That word and that terminology is actually pretty well documented in human history. So the Anunnaki may or may not be local, like as they came from this planet. It looks more like they came from another planet as far as how it's actually being explained. But anyway, Anunnaki is something that the listener should definitely remember.
All right.
In some retellings, the Anunnaki are closer to God than alien, and are alleged to have hailed from the lost planet Nibiru. But whatever they were, they allegedly triggered these previous aliens to retreat and hide in a large, complex, and until now undiscovered cave system far below the Earth's crust. Of course, until now there is no real-world evidence of any such thing, and indeed it's a general idea that has gone on to fuel many a modern and dangerous conspiracy theory.
Donald Trump.
Lizard people. Yeah.
The lizard people, right? And that, what I always remember is the They Live movie, right? So looking at that. But I mean, if you think about it, if I guess if you look at like like if the big asteroid didn't hit, right, would lizard people look like this? Being there's no mammals around, right? Would they have evolved into this kind of way of being? I mean, who knows? But it's really entertaining, and I do like. But it could have happened on another planet as well, so we really don't know. I mean, kind of what that whole the thing means, but that it is an established species within kind of this kind of pantheon is kind of interesting. I have to say.
Okay, there you go. But finally, and while the invading Greys and Saurians perhaps should be easy to spot in the open, so-called Nordic aliens probably wouldn't be. In fact, a defining characteristic of them is that they should seamlessly blend with humankind, because they're an extremely close physical match for us. In some cases, they're described as resembling the Norse gods, like Thor, who himself might be considered a Nordic alien were he to ever appear on our planet. Further Norse variations include the Plejarans, which are said to have originated in a bright and bursting star cluster known as the Pleiades. While other alien types, humanoid or not, are generally painted as having a clearly frightening or unique appearance, Nordics are much subtler, which in itself perhaps makes them a little scarier, although they're widely said to be benevolent and good rather than evil. Like the Greys, Nordic aliens are said to heavily rely on psychic energy. They communicate telepathically and can also live for thousands of years or more. Again then, they're presented as beings of infinite wisdom compared to humans. They're also at times linked with or crossed over with so-called Venusian aliens, said to come from Venus with startling beauty. It's as though, when they appear in alien encounter stories, Nordic and Venusian aliens are a reflection of humankind, usually at its best. And some versions of alien lore suggest that the Nordics do cross paths with the Greys. Here, the Greys are emotionless but efficient, while Nordic aliens are emotionally astute and much more cognitively complex. Which is another reason why this type of alien, if it is out there, would be difficult to spot. Nordics wouldn't struggle with anything about the human way of life. In fact, they'd probably be better at it than even we are. Of course, such is the rich diversity of reported alien history, this still isn't all there is.
I'm not so sure about that idea that an advanced race would be like better at being human than we are. I mean, I'm not even quite sure what he's trying to say right there with that just kind of description. But, kind of the fact of, the Nordics does kind of sort of play in even to like even modern pop culture. So you look at, Thor and Loki being, I mean, they've always been gods in our pantheon of gods, but now it's like the Marvel universe has kind of brought them in to play, right? So like they're almost on an equal balance to an extent. That's not definitely not what people used to think about the Nordic gods. Like it wasn't like, hey, we're living in somewhere in North America and in Maine or something like that. It's just the new Ragnarok or whatever the hell the place is called. It's like this is not right. But a lot of the description of those gods and goddesses is kind of interesting when you look at when you consider the different types of visitations that we may have had.
All right, moving on.
Other, rarer and lesser-known alien varieties allegedly include a race known as the Arcturians. These are perhaps the ET type that is closest to the little green men stereotype, said to stand around 5 feet tall, with big ancient eyes and green skin. Another more obscure reported variety is the avians, a bird-like species, often with a bluish color, that features in some much contested retellings of how the pyramids were built. Thankfully, both the Arcturians and the avians are generally said to be kind and to come in peace, and often, allegedly, to help us lowly humans reach some kind of spiritual awakening. But what's your verdict? We know that alien abduction stories are becoming commonplace in the modern day. The skepticism that surrounds them perhaps isn't likely to disappear until an alien presence on Earth is officially recognized the world over.
I would agree. I don't think there's any kind of like, obviously there's no evidence of any of those things happening. What's your initial, I think you're even more of a skeptic than I am. I'm like more of a believer on the scale. Kind of where do you stand as far as this goes?
I mean, to me, obviously, I think evidence is king when it comes to aliens and all of these things that we've talked about so far in terms of the different types of aliens and alien abductions or alien sightings. And like I said, perhaps my mind will be swiftly changed in the next 5-10 years as perhaps more of these sightings happen due to available technology. I mean, the technology that we have available in our hands at any given time, right? I think the where my skepticism really is most settled in is in reference to like the Fermi paradox. It's like there's tons of, we're not the only ones out there. We can't. It's mathematically, according to Fermi power, it's mathematically impossible for humans to be the only ones in the universe, right? But it's like, but if there are more uh out there, if there are aliens out there, again, to me, it's like, okay, so we're in the 21st century now. Why haven't there been even more like real unmistakable, undeniable evidence that's like, I
Yeah.
want to see aliens, to your point. If these aliens are living amongst us, show yourselves, show
Yeah.
yourselves, because then that'll just like prove it once and for all that aliens do exist, or beings other than humans do exist, intelligent beings other than the humans do exist. Just show yourselves.
Yeah, I mean, I 100% agree with you on that perspective, and I do agree with you on the Fermi paradox. There's obviously other intelligent species that are out there. How long have they been around, right? So, the Earth is what 4.6 billion years old ish. The universe is over almost 14 billion years old, right? So there's
Right.
plenty of time for other species to have made like pretty significant advances in tech, and an evolution to be able to come visit us. I don't think
But
it would take even 10,000 years for us to be able to travel the stars
but
in
there
an
could also
efficient
be
manner.
but there could also be 10 million other planets out there like us that are at the same, technological level. So the chances of us meeting them and vice versa are nil. You know what
Right,
I
but I
mean?
think you have to look at again, the age of the universe and the age of even just a billion years from where we are. Imagine how much progress the human race would make in a billion years. If I think the biggest thing is like in the way that I look at it from sort of philosophical. Jesus, I'm not going to try that right now, but from that standpoint, is like, um, how long are we going to survive, right? And we're kind of in this year right now with I know it's just a little election between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris, right? But that's an exit. That's talked about all the time as an existential crisis, right? How many more existential crises are we going to have in the lifetime of the human race between now and even the next 100 years, right? So how many species like ours have started out and made it to a certain point but failed, right? So
Right.
you have to consider that as well. But yeah, so yeah, we should probably wrap it up here and get ready for the next episode.
And we did tee this off as well on the title. You see that it's 1.0. It's because this is such a huge topic. There's just many, many, many layers to UAP, UFO, all of those terminology that we'll be diving into. It certainly cannot be encapsulated in one episode only. So
But this kind of gets you kind of a bit of a start, right?
it, it
You're
yeah,
getting kind of some of the old school stuff, getting some of the new school stuff, getting into some of the terminology that we're getting into nowadays.
yeah, absolutely. Well, if you enjoy this content, please give it a like and share it across your socials to help get the word out about our show. If you hadn't already done so, please subscribe. And on YouTube, click that notification bell so that you are notified every time we post a new video. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time.